Pass along some information I have, and then even though this is kind of a topic or a discussion on patterns and their usage between all the different axes and stuff that we have here today, but it's not so much an education for me to you as it is an ongoing conversation for the group as well. If someone's got something that they have personally, an anecdote or something they want to share, just chime right in and share with the rest of us. I'm not the expert on any of this. So the idea is that one of the questions that our group and many people that are into axes get is, why are there so many different patterns? So if someone who's not into axes, they just think of it as an axe. They don't understand that it's actually a tool designed for either one specific reason or multiple reasons. And so I kind of want to go through some of the axes that Daryl has. He brought his tables over, and kind of go through some of the historical reasons why they were made, and then my own personal use with those and how I use them, even though they may not be paired to that historic reason, if that makes sense. So let's start small, and we'll start with this one. This was Taylor's, I believe. He'd let us borrow this one. Oftentimes it's called a half hatchet in the catalogs. The layman's term is a carpenter's hatchet. Sometimes people call it a roofing hatchet. A lot of that comes down to how the person is using it and how they use it. It's a half hatchet because normally it's got a squared off top and it looks like half of a hewing hatchet. That's where the half hatchet comes from. They usually are about the size or the weight of a large framing hammer, and they're actually used more as a hammer than they are as a hatchet, traditionally. But because most people don't shingle and don't use it as a carpenter's hatchet as much anymore, now the bushcrafters and the campers are using them, and the throwers are using it more as a hatchet. So technically it's a hammer with a blade on the back end, not a hatchet with a hammer pole attached to it. And there's multiple different variations. Every company has their own style. So that's I consider that to be like an nice all-arounder for camping and stuff. I use them when I was using for construction and stuff, I'd actually use them for trimming off 2x4s or cleaning up joints, or fits really nice in a hammer holster. So you can take it with you, don't have to carry it in your hand, whatever. The next one, let's go up from there. This is called a Plum National hatchet, probably a pound and a half. And this is more of a camper's hatchet. As people in the early 1900s started realizing that the National Forest Service was expanding and they wanted to do more, get out of the cities, because the cities were filling up, I believe that hatchet was one of those that kind of went along, kind of like we have in a bushcraft resurgence. They had a camping resurgence. Camp is actually short for campaign. So you're actually campaigning. You're actually making it an event, not just throwing stuff in the car and going out to the woods. They actually made it an event. And these hatchets are really good for, obviously, for splitting kindling, doing small firewood. They do have what looks like a rafting pole on the end, and I do believe that the guys would use them as a hammer, but not so much from a demolition or construction aspect, but just more of a incidental. They need it at camp. Right, exactly. So let's jump up to what we consider to be like a boy's axe. So I'm doing this in sort of like weight classes. This is a boy's axe. They also call it a pulp axe or a 3/4 axe. It's normally a 2 1/4 pound head, up to a 2 1/2 pound head, with a boy's eye, which is halfway between a hatchet and a full size. You normally come on like a 27, 28 inch handle, and that is a really good swing for that head weight. And I have a theory that obviously as you gain in head weight, you can gain in length, because your head weight is also proportional to the work that you're doing. Like a small hatchet, you're working on small stuff. A big felling axe, you're working on big stuff. So your larger target allows you to have a longer handle because you don't have to be as accurate. because you got a long target, bigger target. Like you're felling a huge tree and they're cutting the notch above their saw kerf. You don't really need to be that accurate. And as you get tired, your accuracy diminishes. So the closer to the head you get, the more accurate you are. And that theory, this is kind of like a side story, that theory on accuracy is one of the reasons that Council came out with a shorter handle and a boy's axe. So as I choke up on this when I'm limbing, because I went from a target being this big when I'm felling to this bigger on when I'm limbing. As I choke up, now my accuracy is a little better to hit that 1.5 or 2 inch limb. So when I choke up on it, now my lower hand is at the same length as this shorter handle, but now I get to utilize the palm swell for securing that in my hand. So now my accuracy is increased, my security or my grip is more secure, so my brain says I can swing a little harder and not be afraid that the handle's going to come out of my hand. So that idea is one of the reasons that Council went with that shorter handle on the boy's axe. Now, the difference in handle lengths, depending on the size of the handle, a lot of that comes down to the larger felling, lemming, and bucking, in my opinion. You're still going to have variations. You're going to have like a house axe is a boy's axe on a 19-inch handle. Well, that's for processing stove wood for the cook stoves and the small fires that they had in the kitchens. And maybe split for the larger fireplace, but that shorter handle is for either a kid or the wife who's doing her own firewood for the cook stove. So you still have variations of every different size head on different lengths, but the traditional ones for the main working axes, they seem to come in sets. Like the boy's axe on a 27, 28, 3.5 pound on a 36, 32 inch. Do we have a Connie on a 32 here? Daryl?
I think that's on your blank. Honestly.
Okay. Anyway, so
The Connies are on 28.
here, this one. Here's one. This is the one. So this is kind of like a happy medium. Okay. So this is almost a full-size head. It's not a full-size eye, right? Yep. So this is about a 3 1/4.
3 pound, 2 ounce, give or take.
Okay, so just about 3 pounds. So it's larger than a boy's axe. It wouldn't be considered a boy's axe. It's a Connecticut pattern, and it's on a shorter handle. Now, traditionally these were more of a bucking axe. So as you're standing on the back side of let's say it's a 28-inch log, you're either standing on it or you're standing behind it. So my target is right here. So I don't need a really long handle, okay? Or if I'm limbing, I'm walking up and down a tree, and I'm cutting limbs as I'm walking that tree. I don't really need a really long handle because now my target is smaller. So and these are theories and these are ideas that the lumbermen, the loggers, were looking for, and because of the demand, that caused the industry to follow that demand. So even though it's the makers that were making all these tools, if it wasn't for the fact of the guys that were wanting to buy specific tools, that none of these would ever get made. Okay, so then we can go up to a full-size felling, like this one. So even though we call it a felling axe, there's not a lot of people that fell nowadays. Most of it's splitting, maybe some trail work. So a felling axe is normally swung sideways, obviously, for felling or for cutting a notch. I know that a lot of people use it for splitting, and so there's a debate on whether or not the profile on a felling axe should be really for felling or really for splitting nowadays. Because even though if you were to make one in modern terms, you still want the geometries for felling, but say 80% of everyone who buys a brand new felling axe really isn't felling with it, they're splitting with it. And then they're like, well, the blade keeps getting stuck when I try to split. That's because it's a felling axe. Or they find an older one that's actually a splitting axe, and they're like, I can't get it to throw chips. Okay, well you gotta know which tool you're using and pick the right one for the job. anybody have any questions while I'm rambling?
Yeah, I think there's a house axe up there, Barry. You mentioned that a little bit earlier.
Well, this is sort of like it. Oh, here, I got it. That's a big house axe, though.
Well,
That's
Looks like a toucan.
the funny thing is that this is a boy's house handle. So it's a short handle with a boy's eye on it. That technically would have been a, to me it looks more like a small faller's axe for dropping trees. So does everybody kind of understand my theory on the length of the handle compared to the head weight and the job? And how that kind of more like an accordion thing depending on people's preferences?
You want to elaborate on the felling?
On felling?
Talking about the purpose of that, I'm sure not everybody else.
Which one?
Talking about using that on felling wedges.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, there's a lot of...
Yeah, and you can see that that's been mushroomed. Now I'm assuming that someone probably uses on splitting wedges, not felling wedges. So a shorter handle like this on a larger head, modern times they use plastic felling wedges, so they call it directional felling. So sometimes in groves where they are selective cutting, they have to thread the needle when they drop that tree to get into open clearing. So they'll cut the kerf on the bottom in a point, create a hinge to only make it go one way. But if that tree doesn't want to go that way, and you're trying to ask it, you drive plastic wedges on the kerf on the backside, so you're swinging, I don't know, depending on where that kerf is cut, you're swinging, you're driving those wedges, and you're forcing that tree sometimes against its lean to get it to go where you want. And they call that a faller's axe. Now, for me, because of the fact that I don't drop big trees, I actually use this 2.5 pounder or 2.25 pounder because I'm not tackling huge trees. The larger the tree, the larger the wedge, the larger the head you need to drive that wedge. And then this is what's called a faller's rig. So it's just a pouch to carry your axe with you so you don't leave it on the ground and carry it with you. So I got my saw in one hand, chainsaw, or the gas and oil. Sometimes I can't park my car next to the trees when I'm dropping. So I like to wear my axe when I'm around so I always know where it's at. Let's see. So let's get into some of the odd ones, I guess we'll call it. And this is a fun one. This is called an ice axe. And it is a very thin blade, long, and it's got a little pick on the backside. And it's normally on a very curved handle with a very strong palm swell. And there is some literature on this that describes what it is and how it works. I've talked to some older guys who actually have harvested ice. So back in the day before refrigerators, they would harvest ice off the frozen lakes. And they would cut them into cubes, and then they'd haul them to what's called the ice house, which is a building that's on the lake, that they would stack that ice in with layers of sawdust or straw between the layers of ice, because if you put 2 blocks of ice together, the weight of them will freeze them together and you won't get them apart again. So like 2 ice cubes, but press 2 ice cubes together, they'll make 1 ice cube. So they have to layer that ice, the blocks of ice with sawdust. Well, if you didn't do a good enough job and you were in a rush to stack that ice and 2 ice cubes or 2 blocks touch themselves, part of this blade is that you can get between those blocks and crack it and then pop it and break those blocks apart. Or if they're touching side by side, you can come down and do that. And then there's a ramp in this ice house that goes to a wagon, and then you grab that block and you pull it and it slides down the ramp to the guy waiting with tongs, picks it up, puts it in the wagon. So to me, these were used more in the ice houses than they were used on the lakes. The lakes mostly is pike poles and ropes to get the cubes out of the water. Let's see what else. Oh, here's another one. This is what we've all talked about. This is kind of like a turpentine axe. So before chemical turpentine, they used to make turpentine out of pine sap, pine tar. And they would scar a tree that was live, called cat facing, And those grooves would all come and they'd drip down the middle and then they collected at the bottom. So you basically have to kill the tree to get that sap out. And I think they do it like on 2 or 3 different sides. So they do one at a time, then they move their bucket around. So they go through like 300 trees and they cat face in all in one direction, so that they knew that from the east everything's been cut, and then they collect all that sap, and then when that tree gave up on that section, they go around and do the next section. And then I think they do it like 2 or 3 times around the tree. But by the time you're done, you've then killed the tree. So it is more of a like a one-time harvest type thing, and then those trees then get cut down probably for pulp after that, and then cleared for farmland. So it was a way for that tree to then give multiple resources from it all at once, right? So yeah, this is, and the funny thing is that in tying this to Council Tool, because I know a lot of history now, we're working with those guys, is that John Pickett Council actually was in the turpentine industry and was working with a company, and they had a hard time getting tools for their trade. So he started making his own for himself and his own guys, and then everybody in the neighborhood found out he was making these really cool tools, and they asked him to start, and so he basically quit his turpentine business and started making axes and scribes and stuff. So it's kind of interesting how even back then the market was forcing his decision on where he was going to be making his money and how.
Is that how council ended up in Waccamaw?
In Lake Waccamaw, yeah. They moved one time, and they back in the late 1800s, like 1890, they moved to Lake Waccamaw from Union, I think, and so they've been there ever since.
So the coastal region was big in turpentine.
Yep. And then and luckily the chemical equivalent of turpentine was basically sort of forced because of the diminishing number of trees that they could harvest for that process. So it's kind of like the market and the demand was forcing the chemical companies to step up to fill that need in the market. Otherwise, it was going to get really expensive. So let's talk about double bits. Hey, look at that. So we'll start with the obvious one. So this is an axe that primarily is used out west on larger trees. My pattern is failing. What do we call this?
Peeler?
I guess we call it a peeler. Yeah. Swamper would probably have a little bit bigger bit on it. But they are used on the larger trees out west, the Douglas firs, the redwoods. And I have a fun theory on why these are so long and narrow bits, and that they wanted a heavier axe, but at the same time they were basically working their way into cutting the kerf to draw the wedge to drop those trees. So they'd start with a saw, and they'd work their way in, and they'd actually, the tree was so big they'd be standing inside of it. And they'd use a really long handle, and if you were swinging that axe all day, your accuracy and you're going to start to get tired, okay? But if you look at the inside face as they're working down, they're basically taking another chunk and then working like 4 inches at a time, because they can't really take bigger chunks because it's just not gonna, you're not gonna pop those chunks out. But once you start getting to the bottom, your accuracy and the length it takes to get to that spot you're chopping is a long distance from your swing. So as you get tired, if this thing comes down, the back end will actually bounce off the inside of that kerf, and by the time you get to the bottom, it's got itself straightened out. So the length of this axe, in my theory, is the reason that they're so long is that it helps guide that into the next cut, and you don't have to be as accurate every time. So you're almost using the inside almost like a backer as a plane. And it bounces its way back in. Yeah. And that's why a lot of those are put on longer handles, like this one. This one's called a Puget Sound, from Puget Sound, Washington. That's the pattern. And that's the same idea. It's a narrow bit, heavy head, but it's really long, so it can kind of flutter, bounce its way into where it needs to be. Modern times, these are not really useful, in my opinion. These are an old, specific axe that it's fun to learn about, but I wouldn't choose one to use.
So with the pubic sound though, with it being the narrower bit, the heavier head weight, does that help with a bigger tree with the penetration? Because you've got the same amount of impact and a smaller.
Yeah, I think it's so they're actually pulling out blocks, not chips.
Yeah.
So as they're basically as they work their way in, we'll call it layers. Each layer is probably about 4 inches deep. So they're actually, and it's green wood. So they get in there, and it, because of the force, it'll actually chip out 4-inch sections, 4 inches deep. So they've got all these cubes that they're creating, not so much chips like if you're bucking.
Yeah.
And that's how I think they were used. So if you had a wider blade, now you're trying to chunk off 4 inches, 5 inches wide.
I was mainly talking about the pubic sound in particular, because if you look at like the swampers, like they do have a little bit like a taller bit as opposed to that one being there. I didn't know if it was just the size of the tree that it helps with.
And I think the swampers are more of the deep south in Louisiana.
Yeah.
And they're mostly used for felling sycamores and stuff. And that kind of brings me to the other reason for a double bit. I know that in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, Minnesota, a lot of those trees from 1860 all the way up to 1910, those trees built the cities up and down the Mississippi and around the Great Lakes. All the framing, all the explosion and the European immigrants that came over, that created all that demand for lumber, and that's how those northern woods got logged off. So a double bit, I want to use that one yet. So let's pretend like this one here. So a double bit oftentimes have 2 bits for a number of reasons. 1, for balance. 2, you can set each blade up differently for its task. Oftentimes in a logging camp was centralized in the work that they were going to work around. So you had anywhere from 20 to 50 to 60 guys in that one camp. And then they'd have to either walk out to the area they're going to work for the day, or they'd get a ride on the sleigh or the sled that they're hauling back. And this is mostly in the winter. Farmers that are going up north to help pay the bills because they can't farm in the winter. And so a double bit allows you to bring 2 axes with you. Oftentimes, larger trees, the bark is really thick and that holds a lot of dirt. And in order to save your saw, if you can peel off that bark before you get your saw in there, your saw is going to last a lot longer. So by having one side set up for debarking and delimbing allows you to have your really clean, or as I call them, my ugly and my pretty side, and have the pretty side start actually cutting that notch above your saw curve. The other aspect with the double bit is that it's balanced enough that your swing is efficient. If you have a heavy head, oftentimes it's hard to get that thing to balance in your hand, and if you're swinging sideways, a double bit is more balanced and it won't roll, and you're not fighting that roll in your hand. A lot of people like to split with it too, because then you can use that advantage and do the twist technique, and then it allows the axe to hit the top as opposed to going all the way through and either hitting the stump or hitting the ground. Which then brings us to this one. This is one that our good friend Roy here redid. Where's Roy? Roy still with us?
Yeah, he's back there.
All right, there he is, hiding.
I'm sleeping.
So I'm not going to take the bit off mask off, but basically just as a regular double bit. And this handle is what they call a Adirondack handle, and it's mainly specific to, I guess, this region, if not maybe a little bit farther north, maybe into New York and stuff. A lot of people think that it's kind of weird that it's got a single bit handle with a double bit eye, and I have a theory on why it's this way. If you were to separate your heads for specific purposes, say one for felling and one for limbing, your felling side would be used at the longest reach that you have to fell with. Whereas your limbing side, you'd have to be more accurate so you choke up on it. So when you choke up, I'm not utilizing the lower portion of this axe. To me, it just feels like double bit now. Whereas this way, it's acting like a single bit. So an Adirondack, in my opinion, is a specialized felling axe that you can also limb with. Now, there's other people who say, well, they just stuck a single bit handle in it one time and it kind of caught on. Well, it's possible that's how it started. But in my opinion, this is actually a legitimate handle for a legitimate axe for mostly purposes that way.
And more modernly on a double bit, especially in the country and the hills that we're in here, you'd see one bit wore horrifically down way beyond proportionally the other side. The other side typically would have been a felon bit. The worn bit would be for cutting roots. And I mean, the really dirty stuff. And we get a lot of those axes here. They'll be an inch and a half to 2 inch plus this.
Which kind of points a finger at the culture that was typical. You know, for people who were getting yard work done, or prior to coal and natural gas being the primarily heat sources for the country, it was all wood. And so even 80, 100 years ago, axes were more popular because they were in demand more because of the way people were heating their houses. It wasn't so much the lumber or the logging industry that was driving that, but just homeowners. And so it makes sense that our grandpa would be using an axe that he knew that he didn't want to use one side for digging up roots and removing trees off the cow pasture. Like up where I'm from, we've got farms where it was hardwood, solid hardwoods when they bought the property. They come in, cut all the trees down, sell the firewood to the railroad for either sleepers or for firewood, and then the farmer would buy the property with all these stumps on it, and he'd spend 5 years clearing stumps and planting crops, and then eventually it turned into farmland. But to go from a heavy eastern woodlot to completely, black dirt for corn takes a lot of steps. And so it makes sense that a lot of those axes would see a lot of abuse trying to dig up all those stumps out of the farm field. Are there any patterns that you guys know of that you would question why they were made, or application? With that?
Yeah.
So from what I've learned, obviously from the group and from talking with guys, your modern day Hudson Bay is not what originally was a Hudson Bay axe. It is a commercialized idea of the Hudson Bay that was started by L.L. Bean back when I think Snow and Neely started making axes for him. So the modern Hudson Bay is kind of an odd duck, in my opinion. It's got a really short eye, which means the connection from that and the wood is not the best. And so it doesn't make a good splitter, because if you get that stuck in a round and then you pull up on the handle, there's not a lot of mass there, and the eye is not very tall to secure that. And so that's a struggle that even modern times we get people like, oh, my head came loose on my Hudson Bay. I'm like, well, I asked them, well, how'd you use it? Well, I was splitting with it. I actually tell people, if you get it stuck in, take a piece of firewood and hit the head to get it to loosen up. Hit the head on the steel, because the steel's not going to bend. Don't use the handle as a lever to try and get it out again. So do you have a closer representation of the original Hudson Bays?
Are you talking about the LL Bean ones? Because he has them.
Yeah, if you gotta know. I got LL Bean.
Did the Norland, or did the Snow and Neely LL Bean, did it predate the Norland? Norland.
Yes, it did. The Norlands came out in the 60s.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, well, the LL Beans, I think they came out in the 30s.
That was a man tool.
So the Hudson Bay is more of a more of a trapper's axe.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of the originals. So you can see the difference time does over a pattern. For people who, because the reason I think these sell so much is because they look cool. Doesn't mean that they're the best choice for an axe. They make good limbing axes. They make good trail axes.
Looks like tomahawk-ish. which
Very
in the
tomahawk,
80s,
yes.
in the
Yep.
80s,
Yep. Now, the original Hudson Bays were trapper axes, and I guess I can use this one as an example. It actually looks more like this Wetterlings. So pretend this isn't a Wetterlings, okay? Let's pretend this is a trapper's axe. So they're using the pole to either set traps or set stakes for traps. So they're using the back end like a hammer. And then sometimes they'll have a little notch right here. And sometimes like the Montreals have got that. And there's a lot of debate on why that's there. Some people think it's just it's part of the forging process and they kept that tradition going. For me, I think it's actually for dipping into a water, hooking a muskrat trap chain, and sliding that chain up so you can grab it, so that chain rubs against the steel and doesn't rub up against your wet handle. So that little notch is a chain or a cable guide for retrieving traps out of the water for muskrats. Now, I don't really have a lot of evidence to prove that, but if I was going to design an axe to do that, I'd put a little notch there so that when I'm hooking stuff, when I put my wet handle into the water 150 times in 3 hours, that wood's going to get really soft. So if I can give a little notch there to protect it, I think that's what I would do. So I
Those
like to
wouldn't have had a hardened pole either. It would have been a wooden stake with
Right.
a trapping. Right.
Let's see what else. I did bring a couple fun ones. In fact, this is one of them. So this is a Wetterlings. I'm not exactly sure of the name of it. Does it have a name?
Force? No, I can't
So
remember.
this is a small from our friend Julia from Sweden. This is her new this is her new carving axe, which I think is pretty cool. So you guys can check that out on Joe's table over there. Thanks, Joe, for filming today. Anybody have any questions?
One more. You were talking about how European axe companies, they kind of favor towards one type of wood, like a cedar pattern, or say North American sake. What were the benefits of the cedar pattern to cut cedar trees? I don't think there's one up there.
So here's a.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the cedars that we're talking about are in the hill country in Texas. So Texas is such a large place with so many trees that there was a market just for that, for those trees in that part of the country.
Yeah, well, I meant like the
geometry?
blade shape. Yeah, blade
Yeah.
shape.
So most of the cedars didn't get very big. They got tall and skinny, kind of like
Well, mesquite pine.
mesquite. Yeah. So the cedar trees were, I'm going to guess they're only maybe about 6 inches in diameter. So you could probably take one swing this way and one swing that way, and you dropped it.
Yeah.
So by having a larger bit and then reducing the eye so that you're not, then you don't have a 6-pound head. By reducing the eye and making the bit bigger, you're able to stay within that 3 1/4 pound range. Same thing like with a council double bit cedar. So that's what this is in a double bit form. Is a cedar axe. So technically, these would have been sold as a pair. So depending on who was using what and when. I don't know if that answered your. Okay.
Well, you want to talk to them about the cruisers?
So you mean like double bit cruisers?
Yeah, double bit cruisers.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So a cruiser typically is a double bit of normally about 2.5 pounds on a 28-inch handle is your typical. Now there's variations either way. And a cruiser was somebody who was hired by either a logging company or the state or the federal government to go through and basically count how many viable trees in a woodlot there were for lumber production. Or sometimes they'd go through and figure out the species of a different woods. You know, what percentage is pine, what percentage is fir, so that in the future they have an idea of that lot being viable for a logging company to come in. Sometimes logging companies would bid on a woodlot, and so they'd send in their own cruisers to count trees and mark trees that had to be cut so they can make a bid on that property. If they didn't have enough viable trees to make good enough lumber, they would either low bid on it or they wouldn't bid it on at all. So, and some of these are hundreds of miles away where they'd have to send their guy in. So the cruiser was one for marking trees or for clearing trails to get to trees. I don't know if that explained enough of it, but that's the historical
As much
stuff.
a person as it was.
But nowadays it's mostly a spun small double bit axe for clearing trails and taking on camping trips and stuff.
I mean, they still would have used it a lot on camp if they were riding in and setting up camp. It
Oh,
would have been
definitely.
a short camp axe.
Yeah. And they'd spend 4 or 5 days on a woodlot because it would take them that long just to get through the 100, 300, 400 acres of the trees.
Yeah, they'd set it up. That'd be their hatchet.
And then the saddle axe is a step above or beyond that, where you take your axe and keep it in the saddlebag on your horse and actually mark trees from horseback. Which I don't think happened as much as we think it did, but
But they could have been doing clearing with it to
Yeah.
be able to ride through it.
yeah, especially if you're walking through, I mean, even walking in 12, 15 inches of snow is tiring. So if you can do all that on horseback, a horse can walk through 30 inches of snow. He's still going to struggle, but it's a little bit easier. You can make more ground and cover more ground that way too. Joe, what do you think? Oh, thanks, Joe. And thanks to Daryl for letting us borrow his axes here.
Where do we find out more information about this stuff?
So, normally I direct people to the Axe Junkie Facebook group. There's a search function. You only have to have is a Facebook account. All that information is available to everybody. So just key a couple keywords in the search function. We'll find you lots of conversations. Plus we have a file system that we've set up. A lot of good information there. The other ones are Blade Forum. There's an Axe section of Blade Forum. And then Bushcraft USA is another forum online. To me, those are the 3 easiest ways to get to information quickly. Also, if you guys can always send a video or an email or a message through Facebook if you have a question on something. If I don't know, I've got a bunch of you guys to ask to help answer those questions. So I appreciate the community and everybody showing up. Let's have a good day. Thanks, guys.